Hi everyone, it's Tonya Gibbs and welcome to my channel. Today I would like to share with you an Americana mixed media tag tutorial. This is an Yvonne Blair Art Girls project. Today I'm going to be using the stamps that are the pledge, military, alphabet, and grunge numbers. As always, I will put a blog post down below with these beautiful stamps that I used today linked up in a post. This is this release. Of course, I have them here for you guys. I just wanted to show you a sampling. They're really good, rich, thick rubber, and as you can see, they're high quality. I love like that she's left some negative space here on some of these designs so that you can doodle onto them. So they're great for journal pieces, as you can see. They're really good quality, and they're a nice size, as you can see from holding them in my hand, and they're going to make fantastic journal stamps. So I just wanted to give you guys a sampling of the quality and the size of these stamps. So let's go ahead and get started on our project today. For my tag base, I wanted to go ahead and do a little mono printing on this, and as a disclaimer, I wanted to let you know that I am not affiliated with Jelly Arts in any way. I just really am one of those crafters who really enjoys mono printing a lot, but I'm going to use my Jelly Arts 3x5 printing press today, and I've pulled out some little wooden stars to use as a stamp. If you have stencils or anything like that, I encourage you to go ahead and use those as well, but these happen to be what I have in my stash, and these just came from a hobby store, and they come in a stack. I'm going to pull a couple of prints and ghost prints of this till I get the pattern that I'm after, and I'm just pulling them on a manila tags that I've cut from a Tim Holtz book plate die. I cut these in massive quantities from file folders. So, and this is Liquitex Basics paint that I have put onto this little printing press here, and as you can see, it is not a perfect print, but that is exactly the look that I'm going for here. Now I am going to clean off my printing press there with just some watercolor paper, and I will use that as a background for another print on another day. So now I'm just going to use the Liquitex Basics in a red color, and this time I am going to take one of my these are some texture cards from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft, and I'm going to use the wavy lines there, and I am going to create a pattern and print that at the base of my tag. So it doesn't necessarily have to look like an American flag, but that's kind of the feel and look that I'm going for in this folk art sort of image that I'm trying to duplicate here. The idea for this tag is that I wanted to do a canvas or this type of design on a larger piece, but I wanted to know if these techniques were going to work first. So what I typically try to do is do the same technique on a smaller scale, see if it's going to work, and then if it does work, then I can do it, repeat it on a bigger scale. So since my palette there has a lot of paint left over, since these full-bodied paints typically dry a little slower than some of the other paints that I use on my jelly press, I don't like to waste the paint, so I've decided to go ahead and color up these stars with the residual paint that's left there, and just pick up whatever grungy effect I can on these little wooden wooden stars, and then use them for embellishments. If they don't all get used on this project, then as I said before, I plan on making a canvas using the same technique, and I will hold on to these stars for that project. And also I am going to clean off all of the paints and everything onto that little watercolor paint palette that you see as well, and that will get used as a background in my journal book later. So now I'm going to take the grunge numbers and just add some more pattern there to my background. I'm rotating my stamp around, so some of these numbers may be backwards, upside down, horizontal, vertical, doesn't matter. Now this is the military alphabet, which is actually got the alphabet written out in Alpha, Beta, Foxtrot, all of Tango, and which I really love. So this gives it a really nice military feel to it. If you would like to duplicate this pattern for possible military thank you cards, thank you for your service, or if you have someone in your life who is in the military and you'd like to send them a birthday card, duplicating this sort of motif would be nice. Or maybe you're just planning to have a 4th of July party and you'd like to duplicate this for a invitation. This would be really nice to do for the front covers of the cards. Obviously the mono printing gives you that opportunity to produce massive amounts of cards at one time, duplicating in high quantities relatively quickly. So now I'm pulling out my distress inks, and this is a tea dye color, and I'm just going to grunge this up. This gives this tag a really nice antiqued look without a lot of fuss, and it fills in all those negative spaces where my paint did not cover, but it also kind of tones down that really bright vivid color of the reds and the blues. Now I'm going to take the sides of that pad and run around the edges there. I felt like it just wasn't dark enough yet, so I went around it with some of the archival ink and jet black, and that just kind of helps to grunge up that edging just a little bit more there, and gives it a really nice vintage dark rustic look. I really love this to do these two techniques with the inking on Americana type projects. It also is a really nice effect to do for masculine things. So I always love to back my tags onto chipboard. So this is a piece of scrap chipboard that I have had in my stash for a while. So I am going to back my tag on that. I'm just adding a little bit of glue and seal there to the back of the tag, and make sure I get really nice, smooth, even coverage, and I am going to apply that right directly to that black chipboard. And again, this is just a piece of scrap where I had made a bunch of mini books at one time, and I had some left over in my stash. Always hang on to those scraps. So once I clean up my surface and get all that glue up so I don't have a problem, I just trim the chipboard down, and then I'm going to punch a hole in the top where the tag hole is with my Crop-A-Dile, and then set one of the We Are Memory Keepers large eyelets there in the center, using the Crop-A-Dile. And I'm slightly off camera there because I need to see, so sorry about that. I did add the glue and seal, or I will here, to that jar was empty, but I'm going to add some glue and seal there to the top of my tag as well to finish it off, because of course the acrylics are not going to run, but because I added the distress ink on top, I don't want that to ever smear off. I want it to be a permanent seal, so I'm going to go ahead and add some glue and seal to the top of that, and then I'm also going to flip it over and add glue and seal to the back where the chipboard is, because black chipboard, as most of you know who have ever worked with it, is not permanent, and it does sort of when it gets wet, it gets a kind of a, it bleeds a little bit. So I do want this to stay permanent, so sealing that up really well will help. Just adding a little bit of heat to that to just make sure it's good, and get rid of all of the tackiness to this, making sure that that glue and seal is set. Once my tag is sealed on both sides and dry, I put that to the side, and I'm going to go ahead and add a nice coat of glue and seal to my stars. Since they are painted with acrylic paint, I don't necessarily need to do this, but because they are wood, it does help to seal down the wood, and just give it a nice good smooth finish. So once they are sealed, I'm just going to set them to the side and allow them to dry, clean up my area really good, and prepare for the next step. I'm going to take a piece of shrink plastic, this is just a piece of scrap, and I'm going to go ahead and die cut out a star shape using a Sizzix die. I just used an old star shape. Whatever one you happen to have in your stash is fine. Just make sure it's a really nice big size. There's several die companies out there that have stars. You use your favorite. And punch out a circle from the top. I just used a crocodile, the larger size of the crocodile. And then using either archival ink or stays on ink, I stamped the image from the pledge stamp onto the star. And you can do it crooked, you can do it however you want to, it doesn't matter, but I'm just going to be really careful that this image doesn't slide and you get a really good impression. You could have flipped it over and just stamped it directly down, but I find that I do much better if I just tap my fingers around and then just lift it up quickly. So there's my image. Now I will say that Stays On probably would be better for this because archival ink is a little bit oily and so it stays wet a little bit longer. Now as you heat the shrink plastic, it curls up into itself and you think, oh no, it's going to be a mess. Just continue to heat it. Let it do its thing. Don't touch it, don't mess with it, just let it do its thing, because as it shrinks to the size it needs to be, those little points of the star will uncurl themselves back into the star shape. So don't panic. Just keep heating it until it gets down to its size that it needs to be. Now I did keep an object in the circle so that the circle would not shrink up into nothing. So you can do that or not do it. Once it got down to a smaller size, I just undid that and then just held it down with my tweezers until it got to the size that it needed to be, so it wouldn't blow all over my desk. But yeah, you can see that it's starting to flatten itself back out again. Now if you decide that it never really gets flat enough, while it's still warm, you can just take an acrylic block and press it and it'll flatten back out smooth while it's still warm. So then I decided that it was just a little too clear and I stamped the image with black. So I decided to add to the negative side of the star some black acrylic paint and white acrylic paint so that you could see the lettering on the other side, because my tag is so dark that the dark lettering was not showing up. It just wasn't enough contrast. And then that worked beautifully. And then I went ahead and did a small star, so it was the medium size star that was on the die cut, and shrunk it down. So when I put the tag together, you'll see I have two large stars and then a medium sized star. So I repeated that process several times. Now it's time to work on the sentiment that's going to be on my card, and I used kind of an opaque vellum. It's clear, but it has kind of an opaque kind of film, and I stamped it with some Versa ink, and now I'm adding a chunky white glitter to this. And I don't know who makes this, but it's very similar to UD, and it's just a really thick, ultra thick white glitter. And then as I heat emboss this, I wanted to get my heat gun really good and hot before I put it onto the vellum. This keeps the vellum from warping and me having to overheat the vellum. And then instead of cutting out the vellum, I decided to rip the vellum so it had a really nice vintage feel to it as well. So I'm just sizing up where the sentiment would go and then just rip around. Now as you're ripping, if you pull towards you, you really get a really nice torn edge. That's just a tip. So I flipped my sentiment to the back side, and then I'm adding my tea dye stain to the back side of the vellum. By doing that, I don't risk getting my sentiment dirty because I really want it to maintain its pure white look. And then I'm going to be really rough around those edges because I really want it to kind of rip a little bit, and I want those edges to be super dark with my tea stain dye. So once I get the sentiment exactly like I want it, and sorry if I'm a little out of frame here, but I wanted to see what I was doing, not worry about what the camera was seeing. Truly all I'm doing is just rubbing the edges there with my fingers to kind of encourage it to fold and bend a little bit, and just encouraging that ink to just, I wanted a really thick piece of ink. I decided to go ahead and glue my sentiment down with some of that glue and seal and do a really complete coverage on that. Notice I did not take my dirty paintbrush and dip it right into my glue and seal. Instead, I pulled it out the glue with a popsicle stick and put it on my palette. That was to keep from contaminating it. Now I'm going to start arranging my elements, and I'm again using the glue and seal. It will dry permanent and stick for life. I've pulled out my little bucket of one-hit wonders. I use this bucket a lot for my tags and little embellishment clusters for cards and tags and things like that. I've pulled out this twine that was in this. It's been around since Christmas and I'm trying to use it up. It's twine that I have colored with Color Shine so that it's got a really nice gold tone to it. And I've made a little bow, and then I've had this little velvet brad in my stash for a while, and it just needs to get used, so I'm going to use it today. I thought I was going to leave that down there, but ultimately I'm going to be pulling it up to the top. And of course I'm incorporating my stars. Now I will admit that I wanted to use 3 stars, and all I had was 2 stars that were exactly the same size in the mediums, and then 2 of this large. So I ended up going back into my stash and pulling out some itty bitty stars and painting them up as well off camera. And you'll see one of those in the final cut of the tag down in the bottom. Then I found these little itty bitty roses. These will complement the velvet rose really well, but they'll kind of help balance that out. I like to work in clusters of 3, so I have 2 little small roses with that velvet rose. That makes it 3, and then the 2 stars there, and then I'm going to end up putting another little baby star there as well. I also found this little clothespin, and I thought that would help to anchor the sentiment down and make it appear as if it were being pinned to the tag, but the clothespin was just a little too clean for me, so I ended up going back over it, and I'll tell you about that when I do it. So I took away the twine from off the bottom and I used it up at the top. So now I'm going to glue down my clothespin a little bit so it doesn't just pop out, and I'm going to work with my twine just a bit. So I've looped it into my little hole there at the top, and I'm going to grab out my little white stars and make them into charms. This is a fun thing to do with the shrink plastic. That's why I put the holes in them, and I'm going to end up tying them to my twine there at the top and let them dangle. That's why I ended up I made 2 of them the exact same size, which in hindsight, I wish I had made 3 of them 3 different sizes. And on my die, I did have 3 different sizes, but I was afraid the third smallest one was going to end up being too small. So I just went ahead and went with 2 the same size, and then a third being smaller. And what I did was I made my loop-de-loop and have figure 8 bow, which you guys have seen me make several times, and then I just took a separate piece of twine. I put that through with a piece of wire and wrapped it around the tag and knotted it to the back, and then I just took a piece of wire, a separate piece of twine, and tied it through the loop and tied my stars through one of the loops one of them is tied through the loops on the twine, and then one of them is tied through the loop that I used to tie off the center, so that they're free floating there in the center of the tag. But I had to fuss with this twine just a bit to get it to tie around in the back. Now they're just kind of dangling there, and after a while they kept flipping over and you couldn't read the sentiment that was on the top. And I really wanted you to be able to read the sentiment because it's the Pledge of Allegiance, and then I also loved the fact that centered in the middle of these stars is one nation under God, because I wanted to hit home the fact that it was one nation under God. So I really believe that as long as this country continues to get on its knees and prays, there is hope for us. So I know we all seem to think sometimes when you read our social media feed that there is no hope for us, but there really is. I decided that the roses were just a little bit too white, so I've added a little bit of peppermint stick, tattered angels to those to make them match the velvet rose that is there next to them. I think they really kind of match a little better now. And now is when I decided that the clothespin is just a little too perfect, so I'm coming back with my um, stamps there from Yvonne and adding the military alphabet to the top of that clothespin. And dry, I'm adding that there. So here are the close-ups of the tag. I added a little bit of hot glue behind those stars so that they would stay at an angle. I really kind of like the way this all turned out. Here's a close-up of the pledge stamp. And here is a tag. I hope you've enjoyed this production today and you had fun hanging out with me. If you did, I hope you will check out that blog post that I mentioned that's in the description box down below, and give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and share this with a friend.